All right, let's get started with our presentation today. Let me switch decks here, go through our agenda, and go through who our speakers are going to be. Let me start off by giving you a bit of background on each of our speakers. We have with us Nico Peruzzi. He has been a partner at the quantitative marketing research consultancy Outsource Research Consulting since 2001 when it was founded. His day-to-day includes working with clients to answer questions regarding product development, customer targeting, brand positioning, and customer satisfaction. He's well-versed in Conjoint, MaxDiff, segmentation methodologies, having conducted dozens of these projects over the past 15 years for the likes of DirecTV, Herman Miller, Sony, TiVo, Honda, and for other research companies. His greatest skill is explaining these concepts to clients in useful, understandable ways. And he says, stay tuned. Outsourced Research will soon be rebranding as Elucidate. And that is exactly what Nico is going to be doing for us today, is elucidating on conjoint and MaxDiff analysis. He'll be followed by Rob Asseron. He has been building and leading research and UX teams since the late 90s. He launched his career at Microsoft, where he was the lead program manager for Hotmail's UX. And then he moved on to Yahoo, where he returned to research with work for the front page and platform standards UX groups, integrating methods from traditional psychological experimentation with quantitative and qualitative data sources to best understand UX issues. He later continued to combine metrics and UX in Yahoo's search metrics group, and then he moved on to director of research at Zynga, where he built a research team from the ground up, again focusing on UX via systematic benchmarking of product readiness, integrating data from large-scale user feedback loops into the organization's operating processes, and enabling iterative product development via controlled betas. In 2013, Rob founded Online Research Guru, LLC, where he consults on research organization effectiveness, marketing research, and UX research. And last but not least, we have Vivek Bhaskaran, who is a founding member and chairman of Survey Analytics and Question Pro, which provide web-based research technologies. He plays a key role in defining the company strategies and using technology and innovation continuously to maintain leadership in the industry. Welcome, Nico, Rob, and Vivek.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you much.
Good to be here.
All right, just a couple housekeeping items. We are recording this session. The slides and the recording will be made available to everyone who has registered and attended. So you will have that after this presentation has completed. The presentation itself should be about an hour, so we're going to run up until the noon Pacific time. So we're going to have time for Q&A, but please be submitting your questions via the Q&A panel, and we will try to answer some of them online as well as some of them live as we go through. All right, Nico, why don't we transition to you?
Alrighty, everybody see that up there, the basics choice research here?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody. Conjoint analysis, really hot topic lately and for the past many years, and I'm going to spend some time today giving you some basics of how we talk about conjoint analysis, in essence, what it is, did a little divergence and talk about MaxDiff as well. But to start with, you may have seen some of these terms used when people talk to you about conjoint. Hey, I'm doing a conjoint, I'm doing a choice-based conjoint, I want to do some discrete choice modeling, I'm doing MaxDiff scaling. A lot of different terms used out here. Different companies use different terms. Some are proprietary to specific software. But the bottom line is that all of these methods involve making trade-offs. We can broadly classify them under the area of choice research. Today we're going to focus on what's commonly known as choice-based conjoint or discrete choice modeling. Those are sort of the two common terms, and when people say conjoint, they often mean that specifically. And then we're going to talk also about MaxDiff scaling, also known as best-worst scaling, or the method of paired comparisons and extrapolation of that. But for the most part, folks call that MaxDiff. So when we talk about conjoint today and MaxDiff, those are the things we're going to be covering. Okay, so let's start with an example. Bad news, you just lost your job. But good news, you have such great skills and you're in such demand that you've got lots of options for new employment here. So we're going to do our own little example trade-off exercise here with your job offers. The recruiter's been tracking you down and said, hey, you're a great marketing researcher, we've got some offers for you. So what you've got here in front of you are some different positions A through I there across the rows, and each of those positions has some aspects of it. It's got a certain salary, and that salary is above and beyond your current salary. You made 1X before, and you're so sought after that all these offers are above what you currently make. And we've got a percentage of travel that's required for this job, a number of vacation weeks, and a % bonus. So take a look at these for a minute and think about which position you'd be interested in taking. And let me give a thanks to Keith Schron, formerly with Merit, and now with Saucy, for loaning me this slide. It's something he often presents at workshops. That's just a nice way to introduce people to the idea of making trade-offs. So take a look through this. Think about what would fit best for you. And as you're doing so, think a little bit about, how am I going through this process? What am I having to do to make this choice? Give you a few more seconds to look at it. It's going to appear on the next slide as well, sort of grayed out a little bit, but you probably had a chance to make your decision now. So, why did you choose? By what process did you choose? Well, what we've forced you to do here is to make some trade-offs. There have been certain salaries offered, but, oh, what do I think about travel? Is there a certain salary minimum that I need, or am I really going for mostly salary? But what about that, oh, it doesn't have enough vacation for me, or I'd rather have a larger bonus? As you go through this exercise, you're really going through that trade-off process that we do in conjoint analysis. And a couple things kind of going on behind the scenes here. So conjoint is, let's think about, there's a common way to think about the word conjoint, and it's considered jointly, okay? So you have to consider these different attributes of a job offer at the same time. And when you have to consider different things jointly, you have to make trade-offs between them because we can't have it all, right? So the model that sort of underlies all of what you're doing is what's called random utility maximization. And that's sort of a fancy way of saying we look at these different attributes and we try and build the product or the offering that maximizes the benefit for us. So I want the thing that for me is going to do the best job of getting me that best end product or end offering. Now, different people go through different ways of approaching this problem. Sometimes people focus on a single attribute and find out what they need there and then go to their secondary attributes and tease out what happens there. Sometimes people use what's called non-compensatory decision-making behavior. And that's where we use cutoff rules. When we approach a choice, it's a human behavior to set cutoff rules, to say that certain things are must-haves or certain things are unacceptable to me. So you might have looked through this list and used some method such as that of saying, well, I really need this, or I would never do a job that has too much travel, or it's essential to me, I must have a certain amount of vacation. So that's the type of process to give you a flavor for how we ask people to make trade-offs when we use conjoint. So why do we do choice research like this? Well, it adds more value because, frankly, when we ask buyers, let's use the word buyers for a moment, to rate the importance of or preference for some series of features or attributes, it really often gives us a little differentiation. How important are all these things to you? Well, hey, they're all important. I'd like to have a high salary, good vacation, good bonus, and for me, I might not want to travel much or whatnot. So we have to force people into making trade-offs to be able to push that differentiation. Because, I mean, in the real world, buyers have to make difficult trade-offs. They have to make concessions, right? So we have a way to force respondents to make these trade-offs, just like real-world buyers have to do. Okay, let's step for a second back to the sort of MaxDiff world for a minute. And at the end, I'm going to summarize some sort of the core differences between a conjoint and MaxDiff. But for the moment, think that you've got a series of attributes of your product. This is a smartphone in this case, and you're tasked with understanding whether it's screen or weight or resolution, and what of these things are important to people. Well, you've probably seen a lot of questions like this, where people are asked to rate the importance of these different attributes. Okay, everybody's seen this? Everybody's seen probably questions much longer than this, absurdly long grid questions with tons of rating scales in them. Horrifying for the respondent to take, and I would argue horrifying for the analyst to interpret as well. Because naturally, well, I'm a respondent here. I think everything's important. I want all of those things. I want all those things in my product. I want it to be light. I want it to be great resolution, have tons of storage, all of these things. So you get these rating scales, and you do analysis of them, and you get a mean score of a 4.2 or 4.4 on your 5-point scale, and you try and interpret the difference between that. Maybe you use some stats. Maybe you try some top 2 box percentages. But basically, that exercise is really not going to get us the level of discrimination that we would hope that we could get. And now, one might ask, well, so why do people do these questions? Why do we do grid questions at all? Well, I mean, it's historical in a way that this was a common way to ask questions on rating scales. There are some rating scale questions that can certainly work, but we would argue that when you start asking about importance or preference, that these stop working. And when you have a small number of items, there are good ways that you can differentiate those. You could ask people to rank them, or you could ask people to do a 100-point constant sum allocation type question, and that's good. Those can work. Those can get you decent differentiation. When your number of items starts to get larger and larger and larger, people would tend to just use rating scales. Like, well, I can't have someone rate 20 things, right? I can't have them split 100 points between 20 things. They're just going to choose a couple of the good ones, a couple of the bad ones, the rest in between is just muck. So people start doing really long rating scales. Well, we'll talk to you today about, why using MaxDiff scaling is an alternative to that approach that can give you much better differentiation. So you might have also seen or been asked to deal with pricing. So now we're sort of moving away from MaxDiff into some of the power of conjoint here. Because when we're asked to price something, you can ask willingness to pay questions. How much would you be willing to pay? Or you can ask the von Westendorp type of questions of, is this inexpensive? At what price is this inexpensive, expensive, too cheap, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality, the research on the research for these types of questions is fine. If you've got a brand new product, you have no idea what the market will bear on this, you can get a good swag at the price using these methods. But these methods invite bargaining. You should not trust the results without follow-up research to drill down to that price. So they get overused, they're over-trusted in our profession, and they really feign precision. When you do something like von Westendorp and you do crossing curves and you come up with a single number and, hey, great, here's my price. Wow, please don't do that. That is, there's no research that validates that type of approach to figuring out pricing. So what's better? What's better is putting people into a trade-off situation where price is a component of a product, but they need to, the respondent needs to make those trade-offs between the price and the features included in a product so that they can tell us what they really value and how much things are really worth. So when we force respondents to make these trade-offs, what we're getting is a much better picture of the values of those product attributes. We get better discrimination. We not only get better discrimination between the things that we're looking at within a product, those attributes, but we also get better discrimination among respondents. We sort of force people apart by making trade-offs. Have them have a little skin in the game here so that they're more invested in the exercise and they are going to differentiate themselves from each other. And that's what we want, right? We want variability so that we can see where the really good things are and the really bad things are, and we can see where the people are maybe that we're really interested in pursuing. Okay, so and also through Conjoint we get the ability to simulate product configuration. Using simulators is a great way to use Conjoint. We get to ask a lot of what-if questions. So here's some of the questions that Conjoint and MaxDiff can help you figure out. We can do things like optimizing features within a product. We can look at how many customers are attracted to a particular feature or product. We can look at demand curves and price elasticity. We can look at brand equity, cannibalization. If you introduce a new product into a market or your product lineup, how does that affect things? How might a product that we configure compete in a current or future competitive landscape? Few terminology things that we can all get on the same page about. When we talk about attributes, these are features of a product. So these are things like price and color and size and amount of storage, things like that. Now within attributes, we have what are called levels. And this is the type or amount of an attribute. So for color, we might have blue, red, or green, categorical levels there. For amount of storage, we might have 64, 128, and 256, sort of an ordinal degree of levels there. So that's sort of in the design phase. When we start to look at outputs, we have a couple things. The first thing are called importance scores. And think of these as the maximum impact an attribute can have on product choice. I'm going to talk a minute about how not to interpret importance scores in 1 minute. But for right now, think of those as having an impact. What's the big impact of that attribute? When we think about utilities, or more technically called part-worth utilities, this is the preference of those levels within an attribute. So another way you can just think about these very simply is consider them level preference. Okay? Ultimately, when we get through to a simulator, we're looking at full product configurations. And we're modeling those, and we're saying, how much is that preferred? So we use a term called share preference. So that's the interest in the product concept captured through those market simulations. Very important not to confuse share preference with market share. Market share is the post-purchase reality of what has been bought out in our market. Share preference is doing a gauge of how well we have configured or optimize the product to compete in that market, how much it is preferred, but then you got to do your sales and marketing efforts, get it on the shelf, et cetera, for it to ultimately pass through and be purchased and get to the market share numbers. A none parameter is the idea of people not purchasing. So if you do simulations, you include a none parameter, that's capturing respondent propensity to not purchase any of the choices that you have provided. A few quick do's and don'ts. Okay, so don't think about importance scores as telling you what is good. Importance is sort of an unfortunate name in a way because people think, oh, it's important, that means it's good. But no, it really only tells you where respondents' attention was most focused. We need to use simulations to really understand what's important. Do not compare utility scores across attributes. So if you've got an attribute of color and you've got red, blue, and green, and you see some scaled number there for, oh, red is higher than blue by some amount. And then we have our storage number, and 128 is higher than 64 by some amount. You cannot look at those numbers across the different attributes and compare them. Utility scores are only to be compared within a single attribute to understand the relative preference of those levels within that attribute. Some do's: use simulations to answer your business questions. Don't just stop at importance scores and utility scores and say, okay, well, this looks good. Build out simulations and build them out in competitive sets and use none parameters. The more realistic that you can make the simulation scenario that you're doing, the better your data is going to be. Put your product that you're trying to optimize or trying to price or adding into your current product lineup, put that in a competitive set with other configured products so that you can see most realistically as possible how it competes. So summarize, a couple summary slides here. Big difference between MaxDiff and Conjoint. MaxDiff, we deal with a single list of attributes. Could be some brands, some features, some messages, some benefits, but some single list of those things. A bunch of brands, a bunch of features, a bunch of benefits. When we do Conjoint, remember, we're considering things jointly. So we've got a series of attributes that have various levels or degrees, very often including price in this full product profile context, where we're looking at those different attributes with the different levels and different prices, and we're trading them all off in sort of an interaction type of way, as opposed to MaxDiff, this single level. Hey, is this one more important? Most important, least important? No, most important, least important. So when we think about what MaxDiff does, it really helps us understand preference for or importance of some list of items. We usually don't deal with pricing in regards to MaxDiff. When we're thinking about Conjoint, we're thinking about things like feature configuration, product optimization, competitive scenarios, price elasticity, demand, cannibalization, product mix, all of these things. And one just last sort of parting point here, oftentimes when people do MaxDiff and Conjoint, they get worried that I can't move on and take this data into a segmentation analysis. We know in segmentation analysis we love to have highly differentiated data, right? Having people who look really different, good variance in there, helps us split things into really powerful segments. And MaxDiff and Conjoint are great at that. So just know that there are ways that you can pull data out into segmentation analysis from these without having to worry about doing a classification survey later on where you repeat the entire MaxDiff or the entire Conjoint. So use MaxDiff and Conjoint to get this highly differentiated data, use it to answer these questions, know that you can use it in segmentation as well. Thanks very much. That's my bit. Happy to answer any questions that come in the Q&A session, and I'm going to pass it on to Rob now.
Thanks, Nico.
All right. Thanks, Nico. And Rob, why don't you go for it now? Rob.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, Vivek. I want to follow up on Nico and talk about a fairly simple case that's simple in one way and not simple in another way. Using it, as Nico was mentioning, MaxDiff is more constrained. We're going to use it for a single list. I'm going to talk about a case of using it to name a product. And in one way, this is pretty straightforward. You've got a bunch of different product names. But in another way, and you want to distinguish among them, but in another way, it's really complicated. And the reason it's complicated is because of the nature of the organization. There are lots of different people within an organization who have different reasons for wanting to name a product a particular thing. And they're all legitimate reasons. They're legitimate from their particular role. And it's sort of a minefield within an organization to come up with a name and be the person who says, okay, this is what the name should be, because you're bound to alienate everyone except for the person who agrees with you from people of different roles. So what does product naming potentially do? We can answer a lot of different questions at the same time, looking to see whether that name will be attractive to people. Looking to see whether that name can leverage brand halo from a previous product. That's an example we're going to talk about today. Looking to see what groups of folks who use that current product, whether that name is appealing to them or whether the name has the opportunity to expand the user base and bring in a bunch of other people. And then it also can answer a question of choosing a name, how much does that help you when you're doing cross-promotion efforts? One name or another may lead to a presentation in particular places within your product line, particularly if you have an online presence with a bunch of different products. So going on, I'm going to choose a simple example, naming a game. Now this is a fictitious example. We never did this when I was at Zynga, and the data is made up as well, but it really illustrates what we're talking about. Typical situation I would run into would be having a game that's coming out in 3 months or 6 months and having a whole bunch of different people saying, oh, we should name this game this or that. A great case is, let's say we have a really successful game right now called Antvil. And by the way, I've since looked this up, and someone does have a game out there named Anvil. My apologies to them. I thought I was choosing something obscure. We should just name it Anvil 2. That's what the next name of the game should be. And then there are different reasons within the product group, within executive level, within the marketing organization, where people come up with different names. It's left to research to decide, okay, what should we go with? In this example, it's a simple MaxDiff example, and we're trying to decide, A, should we leverage the halo effect of a previous name? But this product is independent. It doesn't depend on you having used the previous product. So there's no advantage to having played the previous game. Now, we had some advantages at Zynga, and there are advantages I recommend to everyone. We had a very, very large panel. We could take a question or a set of questions and put it in front of the panel and have feedback overnight and have an answer. We could also show questions via the partnership with Survey Analytics in line in a game very quickly. We could show a question for throw up an overlay screen and show a question and have them answer one question, and then boom, it's gone and it's out of their way. And this is very different than asking someone to opt in where they have to go somewhere else. It would just overlay, we get the answer, and then we'd be done. And we also had the ability to integrate with other data sources, so we could get the answers that we wanted on a particular question and integrate it with what else we knew already about the respondent. So that first question was just basically, that first question was basically, I had these different names. I want to choose what should the name of the product be. Nico mentioned having a none option when you're talking about purchasing, because people might choose to say none. In this case, the cornucopia option is sort of the conceptual equivalent of none. In this example, no one asked me to put cornucopia in there. It's a ridiculous name. It wouldn't work well, and that's exactly why it's put in there, is so that we have something to compare the worst case scenario to. Every now and again you get surprised and it does well, but usually it's good to put in a dog, so to speak, so that you can show everyone where they compare, everyone who has an interest in different names, where they compare. And then the second question, imagining a short 2-question MaxDiff questionnaire, is just doing the same thing but doing it with the preface Antvil to : and then having the names. And the reason this is because if I ran only the previous question, I would inevitably get asked to run a follow-up. Oh, you need to put Antvil 2 and then the name for all of those. But it would always happen, so I just got in the habit of running them both at the same time. What do the results end up looking like? Again, this is just made-up data, but this is a great example of the kind of information you would get. So let's say Antvil 2 came out on top. It had the most likes, so to speak, most interested to play. That looks straightforward on the face of it, and if you were using the normal matrix rating scales of the kind that Nico talked about, and you weren't forcing the people to make a trade-off with other potential names, you might end up going with that, and that happens all the time. But because we asked a MaxDiff where we had most and least interested to play, and people had to make the mental trade-off, what we got is the ability to look at share of preference and say, oh, Antvil 2 looked like a winner just if we had asked people which name do you like the most, but when you consider the fact that a lot of people didn't like it, it really drops down, and because of its very low selection for least liked, Picnic Bounty ended up winning hands down in terms of share of preference. This is the strength of MaxDiff. You're making people make trade-offs in one simple question, and that shows up in the share of preference. In the end, it's usually not this simple. Let me go on to the next slide. Almost always, the reason I call on this slide question 3 under the radar, almost always if I had done a simple overnight gather 300 to 500 responses and get an answer, almost always when I reported that out and and informed the organization of it, I would be asked, well, you didn't compare them all at the same time. So I usually ran this question at the same time, not because I wanted to, not because I didn't know what was going to happen, but because I was going to be asked about it. So I run this question. The results turn out to be a mess, not a surprise. There are enough responses here that it's really hard to disentangle, and typically I ended up saying, hey, well, I actually did that. The results didn't look too discernible, and let's look at the other questions that can help inform us. So I call this sort of a back pocket question. I never tell anyone I've run it. I keep it in my back pocket, and then when someone asks me, then I have it and I can show them, and it is what it is. Why do I particularly like MaxDiff? For lots of reasons. It's efficient, it's fast, it's lightweight, and it gives us the ability to follow up and look at data and cut things lots of different ways. I want to talk quickly about each of these. Think about the judgment we ask people to make. We ask them to make 2 judgments, what's most preferred, what's least preferred. But we collect a lot more data points than that. When someone says A is most preferred, in terms of the pairwide comparisons, they're saying A is better than B, A is better than C, A is better than D, and A is better than E. And for least preferred, they're saying all the individual pairwise beat that one. Why is that a selling point? The whole point of doing research is to have an impact in your organization. If you can't have an impact, you're not going to go anywhere. So the ability to say to a startup who's used to moving very quickly, who's used to making decisions based on the first available data and then moving on, the ability to say, hey, I'm going to ask 2 questions. It's going to give us a whole range of data points that are implied beyond that is a good selling point. The other good selling point within your organization for effectiveness is to say, I'm going to be able to simultaneously consider the positive and negative aspects of a particular name, and I'll show you a score that reflects that. Again, it's really fast. We can get data immediately, and almost always this is the kind of thing that's going to get iterated. Someone's going to say, oh, legal tried to get approval for those 3 names. They couldn't do this set and set. Instead, I haven't made a huge commitment to running a big, huge study with a lot of questions in it. It's a very short commitment. I can just rerun it right away. Already covered a little bit that it's a minimally intrusive method. If you have a panel, you can do it very quickly. It's very easy to do micro rewards via a panel and say, okay, you participated in this 1-minute survey, you get X amount of points that contribute towards your overall ability to redeem a reward. And then finally, one of the things that happened all the time is I would be asked to cut the data different ways. And the reason for that is simple. It's because of these kinds of questions that we were asked to look at, or that we may be asked to look at. So one of the questions I might be asked is, what naming presentation appeals most to the current user base? Well, if I had fielded in line that question to people who are playing the current version of the game, then I could have results that were specific to active players of that game. And if we were interested in expanding the user base to people who weren't playing that game but were playing related games, if I had fielded that very minimally intrusive set of questions to people playing those other games, then I would be able to look at what are the responses of the people who we want to expand it to, and we'd be able to make those trade-offs. One of the frequent things we found when we'd be looking at the results is that men and women would differ. And men, let's take a game like Antvil. That's in Zynga parlance, that would probably be a middle-aged female game. And it would be very common for us to say, well, why aren't men playing this game? It's still a fun game. We'd be able to look at the appeal of the potential names to men and then break that down as well. So that's all I've got, and I'll be taking any questions as well during the Q&A at the end.
All right, Rob, thank you so much. I absolutely love the idea that where you inserted that question into the survey, kind of anticipating executive questioning, really. So I think that was very smart of you. Just you know that you're going to get questions, so you just ask the question up front so that you can have the answer when people ask you the question. Really, that was very smart of you. So I'm going to switch gears over here. And I'm going to talk about a little bit of bait and switch over here. Actually, our original intent for the webinar was do a more conjoint 101 and a more kind of go to the basics. But we also are launching a couple of new kind of enhancements to our existing offering. So I want to go over that really. So that's kind of going to be one of the things that I'll go over. So I should make myself presenter and let me go into presentation mode. So we'll talk about both Conjoint and MaxDiff from a very practical perspective. A couple of questions have been coming up already around how do we, how are utilities calculated, how is share of preference calculated. I'm going to just walk you guys through this. I'm going to go pretty fast through the entire process so that you guys have a good comprehensive overview of what we can do really. So I'm actually going to do some sort of a live demo over here. So I'm going to switch into the tool itself in terms of creating the questionnaire. Most of you who have the platform, subscribe to the platform, can kind of look at the screen and figure out what it is really. It's kind of the platform under which you create surveys and deploy surveys really. And I know we have folks from both Question Pro and Survey Analytics over here, and the Question Pro Enterprise platform will have the same functionality and the same features that Survey Analytics has really. So let me just go into one of my MaxDiff surveys over here. And you can see it over here in terms of setting up MaxDiff is relatively straightforward. You go in and you add in all your attributes. Like Nico talked about, MaxDiff is really a kind of unidimensional model where you have a set of attributes, and what you're really trying to figure out is kind of the importance or the share of preference for those attributes really. The one thing that we can do from a very practical perspective is, even if you're measuring brand attributes, you can, instead of selecting names, you can select images for those brand attributes. So you actually can display a bunch of images and say, hey, look, look at these images and tell us what the which ones you like. I'm seeing some questions around, let's see if you can make this full screen. Let me just make this the full screen. Hopefully this is better, really. One second. So, oops. Let me see. Okay, so hopefully I made my Chrome tab full screen, and you should see the stuff better. The second thing I want to talk about is in terms of settings for MaxDiff, and this is where the power of MaxDiff really comes into play. So if you have a very, very large list, let's say you have, I think I saw a question over there. I have a list of 20 or 30 attributes really. So when you have 20 or 30 attributes, really, the simplest way to do it is like display all 20 attributes to the user and say pick the worst and best case scenario really. What you can also do is kind of subdivide those 20 attributes into multiple steps, and we call these things tasks really. And you can then say like, okay, look, I have 20 attributes, but what I really want to do is to break it down into 4 different tasks. So any user goes through 4 tasks of 5 attributes each really. And those are things you can set up over here in terms of how many attributes do you want to set up per task, and and go through that process. The repeat attribute is also an interesting concept where you may want certain attributes towards the end repeated across multiple tasks. So you can go through that and set up how many tasks do you want repeated, and so those tasks will show up again in a subsequent in a different comparator model. In this particular case, for example, if you wanted a couple of attributes over here, the real life example that I have in front of me over here is, it's a pretty simple one where we are asking the user to select a particular product category, and then oops, one second, select a particular product category, and then let me just go back to my Conjoint. just switch surveys over here. Sorry. All right, you select a particular product category, and then you kind of say what is most and least important for you in that product category, really. And as you can see, we are only showing 4 at a time, but we actually have 6 different attributes in play, really. So you can do the system automatically creates multiple steps, and then obviously repeats the items since you want 4 at a time. Since you want to display 4 attributes at a time, really. Now, let's switch to kind of the analytics over here, which is kind of the fun part, really, within MaxDiff over here. So the share of preference, like Rob said, if you just did basic, frequency analysis, you'd probably get a different. Usually, you'll get a different result, or typically you won't get the discrimination that you're really looking for. The share of preference is really calculated using a logit model that says, like, look, you have the positive utility and the negative utility for any particular attribute, and we kind of do logarithmic analysis on that and say, how do you calculate the share? And we have a paper written up on exactly how the share of preference is calculated. We can share that obviously with you. And the key point in that to understand is that the share of preference is not just a simple here's the positive ones minus the negative ones. It's actually modeled into a logit curve and then computed out. Rob also talked about once you this is pretty cool. So we got the share of preference. That's good. But what we really want to do is to then start filtering based on different criteria, really. And the filtering model is again fairly straightforward. So I have created 2 different filters over here. One for users who selected grocery as the primary option for which they're giving us feedback, and you can see the share of preference is different for those people, and you can create as many data filters and data segments you want and continue on and slice the data through that process. You can create as many filters as you want over here. Not only can you do filtering, you can also do comparison reporting, really. So if you really wanted to see, like, for example, if you really wanted to see how one segment differs from another segment, at least from a share of preference perspective, you can choose any of the data segments and then and have the filter done and effectively compute the same numbers and present it next to each other. So this is something relatively new. At least the comparison report is relatively new for the folks who have been using Conjoint or rather the MaxDiff system for quite a while. This has been something that we've been working on actively for the last month or 2. And that's why I said, like, this is fairly advanced, and we are releasing this right now. I think this is going to go online this weekend for all our customers, really. So that's all. That's going to give you a very quick overview of MaxDiff. I'm going to switch to Conjoint now and kind of show you how a Conjoint survey looks like, and we'll go from there. Let me see. Switch to. So the Conjoint survey is a slightly more complicated one because you're looking at multiple attributes over here. And this is the survey that's out here, and I'll just show you, kind of go through again, I'm going to blow through this fairly fast. So attributes, you define all your attributes for any kind of, this is an example of a TV modeling of a flat screen TV, really. So these are the attributes that we've kind of decided on: brand, cost, resolution, and size. And each attributes have 1 or more levels, really. The key thing over here is we can define attributes as brand and cost attributes, really. So, and I'll explain this to you in a minute. Once you define these as brand and cost attributes, we can then do brand equity analysis as well as price elasticity analysis. In order to do that, you must have obviously a brand and a cost attribute, and you can have other attributes associated with this product. But these particular attribute types have to be defined correctly, and generally they're in kind of ascending order in some kind of ordinal fashion, really. So the key thing over here on discrete choice Conjoint is the task count, the concepts per task. So let me explain what each of them really quickly mean. The task count is any respondent will see, the number. He goes through a series of steps, and in each step, the user is, forced to choose between, 2 or 3 or 4 concepts, and a concept is created using a design, really. So there's 3 different steps over here. So let me talk a little bit about design. Typically, when you're doing a conjoint study, you need to come up with a design. So once you set up your, attributes and levels, each concept has to be created, and typically that is done. There are 2 ways that we can do it. One is a random design pattern, which basically means we're going to create random product groups out of this and show it to the user and have users select them, really. So that's one way of designing it, really. Random works very well if you are going to use a large number of users going through the system, really. So if you have 5,000-6,000 users going through the system, the random design works flawlessly. Actually, it's very, very good, really. But if you have a smaller group of users going through the system, what we recommend is we have a design generator. It's called the D-optimal design generator, which basically, in a nutshell, can allow you to create a design pattern, create a concept pattern that is orthogonal, that has maximum orthogonality. What that really means is you have the capacity to create multiple product groups that are as diverse as possible, really. And then the user can go through each of those. Then you have a high diversity of product groups, and once you have high diversity of product groups, you can, the user chooses between them, and that creates the utility values, really. So, and then the last way we can do it is if you already have a design in play, using some other model that you've already come up with, you can import that design into the system. So once the design is imported, then tasks are created, and then the users go through that set of tasks that you've imported, really. So now let's kind of switch over to the analytics for Conjoint, really. And this is where you can start seeing, again, we start off with the importance of the attribute importance, really. This is very similar to what Nico was talking about earlier on with the importance scores, really. And the way the importance scores is calculated is fundamentally it's based on, what is the standard deviation of the utility, really. If you can see, the utility values for cost vary widely, and typically almost in all conjoint studies, the cost attribute is going to be the most important, or the one that varies widely. What it really means is if a user moves from $8.99 to $9.99 to $12.99, that particular movement is the most, has the highest impact, really. And so, as Nico kind of said, it's not that it's important, but it has the highest impact in the purchasing decision, at least. So we compute the importance scores and display them to you. It's fairly straightforward. The utility values, again, are computed using a logit model also on Conjoint here also. And the utility values are in itself, the numeric values do not mean anything. They're not absolute values. What they do mean is they're all relative to each other, really. And you can see, the utility values for the $1,500 products are obviously much lower than the utility values for the $900, the $899 product, really. So that gives you an indicator of kind of how, and the scores really give you how much the difference is, really. The absolute number that you can see on screen, the 0.4 and the 0.35, they don't really matter. It's the relative numbers that matter. So the new features that we've added in is what we call the profile playboard, really. So once we have the utilities computed, what we can do is literally create a simulation of every single profile across all different attributes, brand, cost, and resolution, really. So for every single attribute, we can create effectively a n by n matrix, really. And then, obviously display the best and worst profile, and you can literally scroll through and see how each of these profiles are doing relative to the best and the worst profile, really. And not only that, you can then say, like, look, I only want to look at Samsung, really. I want to look at Samsung, and there are 32 different profiles for Samsung based on these parameters, really. And you can see how these profiles, how better or worse they are, or I guess how better than the worst profile and how worse than the best profile really that they are compared to each other really. So this is a new, this is absolutely a new feature that we are launching again this weekend. So this gives you a quick kind of high level. Once the data has been collated, you can then come back over here and look at the different profiles for a particular brand and go through this really. And let's talk about, Nico also talked a little bit about the market share simulation, and let's talk about that a little bit. So what this does is once the utility values are computed, over here you can see the utility values for each of the levels are computed. Once the utility values are computed, what we can do is create effectively a simulation of new concepts that are either in the marketplace or concepts that you are introducing in the marketplace, and see how each of those concepts relative to the data set compare. So in this particular case, I've created two concepts over here, and I say like I want to run the simulation between these two concepts. Stepping back, what this really means is if you only had these two concepts in the marketplace, you would, based on the data set that we have, 739 people would choose this option really. But that is assuming these two are the only concepts available in the marketplace really. And so that gives you kind of a relative measure of how each of these products in the real world would do really. Although we label this as market share, you can understand that this is based on the data set that has been collected. This is not truly a market share, it's an estimate of the market share really. And lastly, let's talk about the brand premium modeling that we've come up with. So this kind of gives you an estimate of, fundamentally what we are trying to measure over here is like how much is a brand worth really. We know the different price points based on the data set that we have. We know the different price points that are in play. But through this model, what we can do is say, look, the utility values for Sony, Samsung, LG, and Vizio are known, and the spread of the utility values are also known. We also know the price points and the spread of the price points. So assuming, we choose the lowest one and we say, assuming Vizio has a $0 brand value. Now LG has about 300, it's what we call kind of, brand, the relative brand value is about $300 more than Vizio and $497 more than Vizio really. Since everything is relative, we assume Vizio to be, we choose the item which has the lowest utility and then compute the actual increase in price that you can gain based on the current price differentiation already. Since we already have price as one of the attributes, so we leverage that data set to say like, since we already have price as the attribute, we know the spread between the utility values on the brand side, and we use that same model to come up with a brand premium and actually a real dollar figure. We also compute a price elasticity model below that. Again, what you're seeing over here for brand really, you see as price goes up, generally all the brands, kind of the percentage of users selecting that particular brand will go down really. But what you can see over here, for example, this is where kind of you can actually start playing around with the price elasticity. For the Vizio brand, as the price goes from $8.99 to $9.99, the slope is much lower than for other brands, for example. So you can kind of extrapolate from here that these brands, Samsung, for example, goes down by 4 points versus Vizio only goes down by a single point. However, later on in the second in the second part of this particular equation, you have Vizio going down by 3 points over here. So this gives you kind of the slope at which the price, as the price goes up, how much does your kind of market share or kind of really kind of the affinity towards that particular towards that brand goes down really. So that's one model for price elasticity. What you can also do is not only just use the brand, but you can also look at other attributes and say like, as the price goes up, what happens to, what is the slope, what is the decline at which, what is the slope at which the generally it'll be declining slope in general, at least, just again based on the data set. And the magic really happens is if you actually find the data set where you have more people at a higher price. So if you ever have a cross-linking over here, if you ever have these two lines actually intersect and go up, then you know that there is an inflection point over there. So that's kind of what you're kind of really looking for. But typically you won't find them. But what you can do with the price elasticity model that we have in place is at least find the slopes and really create price bands for yourself. You now know that the slope at which any one particular size goes down, and you can compare the slopes really between the different attributes. So this is again a brand new feature that we launched that we are launching this weekend. That's kind of about it from my side, and I'm going to switch to questions.
Great, thank you, the three of you. We've got a few questions that have come in that I think we can address. Thank you everyone for holding on. We know that we're at the noon hour already Pacific time. We'll take just a couple of questions here though, but as we wrap up. One question that came in, and I'll open this to the three of you, see who can answer it. Someone asked, can you help estimate a sample size requirement for a particular attribute or level size analysis? So when you're doing this kind of analysis, what would be general rule of thumb, I guess, for the sample size in terms of number of respondents you would need to really get a good data set?
Nico, you want to take that?
Sure. Well, so since this analysis is being done with a logit model, you probably want to have at least 300 people. There's a sort of quick answer for you that you're going to want that to allow the model to converge and work pretty well. So 300-400 better. But oftentimes sample size really depends upon your industry, your company culture. When you're like Rob and you got millions of people on your platform, sample size isn't a problem. We do a lot of research with medical device manufacturers. And when you're talking to directors of pharmacy or something, we're only going to get 150 of them. So we often have to tweak our models and use some different back-end analyses to make that work. But general rule of thumb, shoot for 300 or 400 people.
Awesome, thank you. One that we've gotten, I'm guessing from a lot of our Question Pro clients, our customers, is, and this is for you, Vivek, they're asking, can they have this on the Question Pro platform?
Yes, we are launching the enterprise version of Question Pro, and that will be available as part of the enterprise platform.
Cool. This is one that just came through. If the number of attributes that you want to measure is a little too large, do you think that running a factor analysis prior to Conjoint can prove to be helpful? And Nico or Rob, we'll let either of you take that one.
This is Nico. Generally, what I would advise instead is to do a MaxDiff before your Conjoint. So, I mean, factor analysis is good for revealing sort of latent factors or themes that underlie your series of items. So say you had all these feature items. If you put it through a factor analysis, what you're going to get through is you're going to get, oh, here are the ones that have to do with service, and here are the ones that have to do with usability, and here are the ones that have to do with this. And fine, if you want to roll things up in that degree, that's fine. But more often, people are trying, when using Conjoint, to specifically configure a product. So you're going to want attributes to come forward that are specific to that configuration. So you might start with a MaxDiff if it has 20 features in it that you're considering adding. Do that first sort, find out what the top features are, and then take those through to your Conjoint and blow out the levels of those and put them in relationship to price so that someone can do that trade-off exercise.
Cool.
Yeah, the only thing to add to that is as a top-notch answer, the only thing to add to that is I find it's useful to keep organizational awareness while you do that. A lot of times, keep in mind, you don't have a choice about what you evaluate. So ruling things out via whatever method doesn't help you if you're not being sensitive to the concerns of the folks in your organization about what they want considered.
Right, right. Looking through our questions here, we have
one of the questions that is, I'll take a look at some of the questions that are largely kind of software related. Is exporting of the individual utilities? Yes, the computation of the utilities can be exported out along with the values, really. So that's a pretty straightforward. I didn't go out and show all the details of the export functionality, but generally, as long as the data is in there, you can export out the data, really. So the question was, can I export the utility values out? So that was the answer to that question. Z, any other questions?
we have one last question here. It says, can someone talk about an example of using Conjoint or MaxDiff to measure equity in a brand name?
Okay.
Vivek, you want to take that? Or you want me to take it? Or
yeah, I mean, I think in general, the example that I went through generally shows that. The example that I went through where people were asked to select, multiple products based on the TV brand, really. And you could clearly see that there was a distinction between the Vizio brand and the Sony brand, really. And the example that I showed you actually computed the utility, it computed the equity, if you will. So we know that, approximately the Sony brand is, compared to the Vizio brand, has at least a dollar figure associated with it, which is, at least a couple of $100. I think our numbers were about $500, really. So $500 more, really. So that's the computation that we've come up with. So the example that I just showed you, you wouldn't be able to do that with MaxDiff because you're only measuring one attribute realistically. But with Conjoint, when people are selecting product lines, you can compute the brand equity using what I just showed you. I think that's my answer, really. Nico, do you want to add to that?
No, I mean, I think that makes sense. I mean, in essence, when you're trying to isolate the equity or the value of any particular attribute that you got, it's best to use simulations. And then you can do very simple things such as run simulations, your product with a key brand in a competitive scenario, and then vary that brand. Imagine that brand was now a generic brand or some different brand. And really just look at that change in your share of preference, all else being held equal. But just changing the brand and see how much movement you get in your share of preference. And in essence, that's where you're getting at. What's the power, I mean, broadly, the equity, the power of my brand. Attributing a dollar value to it is really, another step above, but you can do it even more simply by just moving that single lever in a fixed scenario and seeing what kind of change you get.
Juliet has an interesting question in terms of what kind of products and services have worked best with Conjoint, and specifically, are there tangible products like TVs and smartphones? I'll give a quick kind of rundown on my experience. It's actually pretty interesting. We've done Conjoint studies with companies trying to figure out what employees want, really. Just nothing to do with either a product or a service. So as diverse as employees have health benefits versus basic services provided to the employees, multiple HR departments of a couple of different companies, and I've talked to them in terms of running Conjoint studies to determine what characteristics do employees really care about. So in general, at least my answer to the question really is, in general, you could run Conjoint anytime you want to, anytime you're making a decision, really. And that decision could be something as simple as, taking up a job, to what employee benefits, what employees care about, to, obviously purchasing decisions like, which watch or which TV to buy. So it's not really limited to products. It can be, my thought is, at least anytime you're trying to make a decision, you could model a Conjoint offering around it. Rob or Nico, do you want to add to that?
Well, I mean, yeah, we've done Conjoints on relatively obscure and difficult to understand products. And really, what you need to do there is you need to do an educational process. So it might be that you do some pre-screens or list information prior to the conjoint that helps with definitions or helps basically put everyone on the same page. There's also, I mean, you know, people often come to us when they've got some really crazy idea that kind of nobody else can do, and it's very complicated, and we might build an extremely customized exercise that walks people through a sort of a multi-stage choice process before getting to a discrete choice type of exercise. And through that, those pre-exercises, it often serves as an educational exercise for folks to, as I said, really get on the same page and understand and clarify some of those perhaps more obscure things. Another thing that people are doing is, I heard this at a conference recently, is that folks, you can do what in essence are called relative levels of an attribute. So say you have an attribute and it's very untangible. It's like weight of a cell phone or something, right? How in the world are you going to say, well, this one weighs 6 ounces and this one weighs 4 ounces and 3 ounces? Nobody knows what that is, right? They're going to get out their kitchen scale or something. So what you can do is you can use a relative leveling. So you can take, for example, that cell phone and say, baseline it at, this cell phone weighs about as much as an iPhone, you know, 6. Choose the most popular thing, whatever it might be. And then you go on either side of that and you say, weighs 20% less than this baseline product, weighs 20% more. And so there's interesting things people are doing to try and get at people's relative preferences for attributes that are less tangible.
We'll take a couple more. I want to address one more question, and this has come up quite a bit. At least I have fielded this question multiple times. This is from Brian around what is the sweet spot for the number of features for MaxDiff? Or I guess another way to ask is how many features would be too many for a MaxDiff exercise? So, Nico, what's the largest number you've done, and Rob, what is kind of the smallest and the largest number you've done?
Rob, I'll let you go. I've been talking a lot.
Yeah, I find it. I really keep it low, but the reason I keep the number low is part of my overall strategy, which is similar to in kind to what Nico's been saying. You know, I would much rather conduct multiple efforts, short, quick, very unintrusive, and be willing to do things again than try and get everything into a big effort. So I tend to use 4, 5, 6 items in a MaxDiff. You saw in that one example I had that the results I said usually will come out as a mess. I think there were 8 or 10 in that. It's not impossible that comes out okay, but often it's just not very. It's not very discernible what's going on. So I'd like to keep it in the half a dozen range.
Okay, so I'll give you the other end of the continuum and tell you that we've done a MaxDiff with 100 items. So obviously this took a lot of custom programming to do, and there are industries, you know, some CPG type fields and such where there are tons and tons of things that they're trying to differentiate between. So oftentimes, you know, we use 30 as kind of a marker, after which we will need to do different things with programming. If you sort of employ an experimental design behind things where you are creating, in essence, a number of different versions, quote unquote, of the exercises shown to people and have people go through a few screens each, you can easily handle 20, 30 items. When you get above 30, you start to have to use different methods, and the kind of methods out there that people are talking about now, one is called sparse MaxDiff, one is called express MaxDiff. In essence, they just take a lot of looping and programming and such to take all this data apart, present it to people in a way that the exercise is doable and still only takes 2, 3, 4 minutes for them to get through, and then you merge it all back together on the back end and do your modeling on that.
Yeah, my thought would be it really is largely dependent on the cognitive stress of the respondent, really. You know, if a user, you know, at any particular screen, the user can only select between, you know, 5 to 20 options really. Anything, asking a user to select, for more than 20 options from a pure human cognitive psychology perspective is it's not realistic, frankly.
And I would never show people 20 or 30 at a time. I would never show more than 5 actually at a time. What one would do is create a series of cards, a series with an experimental design behind it that pushes multiple versions, and people have to do a few screens to get through that.
Okay, that's a really good clarification, Nico.
Yeah. Keep the cognitive load low on any single screen, not more than 5, and then beyond that, you're building in basically card design, sort of like we do Conjoint, right? I'm going to just show someone one Conjoint screen with 3 things on it. We show them a series of screens, and the same thing is often done with MaxDiff to handle a large number of items.
Great. Thank you. Lauren says he's done it with 36, so we can keep pushing the limit over there. Alrighty. I think we're about out of time. It's 12:15, so let's kind of wrap this up. Thank you, everybody. Z, do you have any parting comments?
No, for those who asked questions that we didn't get to address live, we will be sending follow-up emails directly to you to answer your questions. And thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Nico, Rob, and Vivek, and thank you to all our attendees.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having me.